Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Positive Post in Conversation. I'm Zazie Todd, and I'm joined, as always, by my friend and colleague, Kristi Benson. Hey, Kristi.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
We have a wonderful guest today because we're joined by Emily Priestley. Emily is a multi-certified dog trainer. She graduated from the renowned Academy for Dog Trainers, and she's a certified dog behavior consultant through IAABC. She's been working with and handling dogs professionally for over a decade now. Emily specializes in working with herding breed dogs who are struggling in pet homes, sorry. Over a century of selective breeding for working stock, as well as a rise in popularity, has led to many guardians struggling with their herders in an urban setting. And Emily's long career with the BCSPCA has also allowed her to have a proven track record, having personally handled over 2,000 dogs. So, with experience with many breeds and all problem behaviours, Emily's worked with dogs desperately needing intervention and behaviour modification. Emily specialises in reactivity and compulsive disorders, but she's available to help with all breed challenges from misdirected herding, spooky and fearful behaviour to nipping, biting, and everything in between. And her book about herding dogs, which was recently published, is called Urban Sheepdog. And if you happen to have a herding breed, this is a book that you really want to read. It's packed with information. And so that's why we're going to talk to her today about her wonderful book. It's called Urban Sheepdog, Understanding Your Herding Breed Dog. And it's available from Amazon and Dogwise, I believe, as well. So that's fantastic. And Emily, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to it. That whole intro just made me exhausted thinking about all of the dogs and work. I'm tired now. It's a lot.
Yes, you bring so much experience to this, and in particular, so much experience with herding breeds, which is why we're talking to you today. So, this show is especially for anyone who has or wants a herding breed dog. And we often think of border collies as being the poster child of herding dogs, but there are actually a lot of different breeds that count as herding dogs. And some people who are getting a dog for the first time may not actually realize which all of these breeds are. And for example, in your book, you mentioned Rottweilers and Corgis as well. So, for people who aren't very familiar with these breeds, can you tell us something about how these dogs were bred and what they were bred to do? And I don't mean specifically Rottweilers and Corgis, but herding breeds as a whole.
Yeah. Well, there's so many different types of herding. So the first thing that we like herding as a general term just means that we're moving livestock or moving animals. The Rottweilers, I do mention they're sort of, I think they're outside of the herding group. They're in the working group, but they traditionally came from a herding background. But I think so many people just think about border collies when they think about herding. So I see people even with like Icelandic sheepdogs or with cattle dogs or, whatever breed it might be. And they are thinking about their dog as a border collie. So we are very familiar with how a border collie works. But there's so many different types of jobs that these dogs had to do. So we would see these sort of classic, the border collies, they can do so many fine little detailed jobs. They can separate sheep in groups. They can separate one sheep out of a flock or out of a herd. They can, move on a dime and precision. They're precision instruments and they're just beautiful to watch. But then we have like, I always keep this poster up in my office because it reminds us what some of these dogs were meant to do. And so cattle dogs, I think, get lumped into they're expected by some guardians or by some people to be more like a border collie, but they're a drover, meaning they're moving huge groups often of livestock from point A to B, and they're not as finessey as a border collie, and that's okay. It's not a detriment to them. It's actually just how they do their job. But they're way more forward. They're going to use a lot of bark, and they often use bite. And their job is a little bit more rough and tumble and independent. So drovers are just a little bit more forward and barky and bouncy. And then we also have, I mean, everything in the herding group from these guys right up to Catahoula leopard dogs, which I don't often think about as a herding dog, but these are more like catch dogs or dogs that are going to go out and sort of rustle something up and bring it back to you. And so there's just so many different jobs traditionally that these dogs would have to do. In a nutshell, they're all moving livestock. they're all just going to do it a little bit differently. Some are going to do it a little bit calmer and with more finesse than others, and some are going to do it as a full contact sport, like our healers. And so I think it's, the border collies, I love to watch them. I mean, who doesn't like to watch? I mean, if you're a dog nerd, I guess you like to watch like herding trials just to see them work. But they're really just one type of many types of herding, if that makes sense.
Lots of variety then in the breeds and the kinds of things that they do and the kinds of behaviors that they've been bred to do.
Yeah, exactly. And they all have this, we talk about software a lot, it's like how they come pre-installed or instinct, right? And it's very, very strong. And like I find with my herding breed clients, a lot of these dogs have come when you talk about like corgis, in my practice, I don't think the ancestor dogs immediately back in the corgi line were working dogs. But they do have some of that, still there. But a lot of the cattle dogs, the Aussies, the border collies, a lot of my clients like went right to the farm, right to the ranch, where there was working parents that were bred and they picked the puppy up. So some of them are like direct descendants and directly related to actual working stock. Whereas the Rottweiler, like we'd have to probably go quite far back, or the German Shepherd, we'd probably have to go quite far back to see their ancestors actually working or tending sheep.
It's interesting. I always find it's interesting to consider how how often it seems guardians desire this immediate connection to a working dog, even though it's going to make their lives and their dog's life so much worse. Like I found it's like there's like this weird disconnect where they're like, well, no, she's from working lines, as though it's this great thing. And I'm like, well, and that's why you're paying me, that's why you're struggling with all of this. And that's why your dog is struggling. And I wish that we could sort of put it out there that, man, actually getting a dog from pet lines is a beautiful thing. It's beautiful for guardians, it's beautiful for their kids. It's way better for the dog.
Yeah, or even for some of these dogs, if you get a show line dog, you're going to have you can have the dog you want and the look you want, but it's not often, they're not as hard to manage or hard to live with. I think it unfortunately is a bit of a flex. We see it all the time, like, oh, my dog's a working line shepherd.
Total
Like
flex. Yeah.
it's great, but it also comes with that's a lot. That's a lot of work. And I do also think that one of the big things that has come back to bite us in the butt is this concept of it's all in how you raise them. So a lot of these guardians are getting the dog and they think like, and I don't know, maybe it's not even conscious of a thought, but if I bring them home, like I'll just raise them differently and that won't be there. But that's not the case. It's, these dogs, especially like if you go to a ranch and you pick up your healer puppy and bring it home, we just have to make sure we're not surprised when that stuff comes out because it is there. And so it's not all in how you raise them. It just because they never see a cow. I don't know that Mozzie's ever seen a cow or that she would necessarily be a great working dog. But it's there, right? It doesn't matter. Her behaviors are going to be there, whether or not they're not just always switched on by being on the farm or being on the ranch. So it is a bit of a flex, unfortunately. And like, I think these like active, high drive dogs, they're just really, they're attractive in many ways. I work with a lot of people who are very active. So they go camping, they go mountain biking, they're runners, they want to be out all the time with their families on the trails and things like that. So there is some, attraction to these breeds. That's what I'm going to take him out. He'll be fine because I'm going to run with him. What could possibly go wrong? Well, a lot can go wrong. And so it's, I think that's another reason why people are attracted to them. But there's a lot of breeds out there. I just made a post on social media about this yesterday. There are a lot of breeds out there that will give you that active companion that might not come with some of the intensity. So, there's nothing wrong with getting, like, I think honestly, if when I hear people say that they want a cattle dog, but they're not really into sort of the spookiness or stranger danger that can come with them, or the like, some of these dogs don't interact well with other dogs. Um, Sometimes I wonder why they don't just go and adopt like an adult pit bull. I think that's like pit bulls are often very, um, you know, people. They're great with people, and I sometimes think like I think they want a pit bull. They just didn't realize it. They want the active dog, but the dog with the off switch. They want the dog who's going to be friendly when their family, like their friends, come over. Um, so I muse
Handleable.
about that sometimes. I mean, they're
Yeah.
obviously outside of the herding group, but I'm like, go and adopt a social pit bull, and you'll have exactly what you're looking for in the cattle dog.
So that actually kind of leads us into the next question that we had for you, which is at the start of your book, you do write about how you got into herding. Everybody has their origin story about their breed of choice, which I love hearing about. But yours, you had your origin myth about how you got into herding dogs. So how did a herding dog slash pit bull come into your life?
Well, oh man, I think probably goes back to like if we could peel back the layers and go back to like childhood Emily. We grew up in a very British home, and we watched All Creatures Great and Small was like all, it was a thing. They're called Britain animals, and they're like these plastic farm animals, and that's what we played with, my sister and I, like every single day, all day. And guess what? There's like sheep and border collies. And I even back then liked the black and white border collie better than the red and white, and that still holds true today. I still am a huge fan of the black and white classic dogs. And so for me, there was I think a bit of, it's a bit romantic for me. Like I just love the landscape. I love the look. I love being out with my dog in all weather. I just love everything about um border collies and just everything that goes with them. But I don't know why it was that dog that we got that day. I was really interested in pit bulls at the time. I've done a lot of work in the past in pit bull rescue and working with pit bulls, and owning pit bulls were what we had mostly for the longest time. And Daisy just happened to be a border collie cross. And I think that was appealing to me at the time, but I just wanted her. There was just something about her. And to this day, I still think like if we could clone dogs, well, we can, but if we had them, if I had endless money to clone dogs, she's the one that I would put into every home. If somebody came to me and said, I'm going to breed a border collie pit bull cross, I would be like, that's maybe not, sport people do this a lot, but maybe it's not for everyone. But whatever it was about her, she was perfect. And she was a great starter dog for me. She was just wonderful. So she came into my life. And it was with her that I thought, like, maybe I do want a pit bull, or sorry, maybe I do want a border collie one day. Um, but life happens, and we've just had dogs in our lives that were perfect for us, regardless of breed. And so Griffin was the first time where I was like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to go and I'm going to get my puppy, and I don't regret it for a minute. He's a lot, but he's everything that I could ever possibly hope for in a dog. So, um, but working with them was also like kind of, I think it was, I didn't go out looking to work just with herding breed dogs, but I wanted in my private practice to work with fearful dogs, and dogs who are struggling of all breeds. And a lot of people have reactive, cattle dogs, reactive border collies, fearful dogs. And so a lot of people were saying, like, I'm looking for someone with breed experience, and I have them. I live in my home with them. And so I just started taking those cases, and it sort of happened organically. It wasn't like a planned process. But there's just so many of them out there struggling. So it was an organic process, but here we are.
Yeah, and there are a lot of people struggling. So when someone gets a herding dog as a pet, they do quite often have issues. And in a minute, we're going to get into what's normal and what's not normal. But before we do that, can you just give us some examples of the kinds of behavior that people might struggle with in their pet herding dog?
I think the biggest one people struggle with, even in a dog who is perfect, is how much time some of these dogs need. So we don't need to have a dog who is struggling in any way to be a dog who the owner just can't or doesn't want to keep up with. I think we think when we get them, I'm ready, you know, when we're excited and we get them and we bring them home. But they're usually just, you know, even the good ones are sometimes more than we were expecting. They have the ability to go all day. I mean, my dogs are sleeping right now. I promise if I stood up and they thought I was going out, they're ready to go. If we go all day and I come home and they go back to sleep, they will still go again. There's really no time where I have to motivate them to, you know, get up off the couch and go to work. They're ready all the time. And that can just be a lot for the average home, especially when we have, I mean, I'm a dog person. My spare time is dealing with my dogs. But if you are working all day, you've got a family, you know, you've got a social life, you've got other things going on, um, how much time in a day is sort of left over for the dog? And is it going to be enough? And sometimes I think just even that is more than most people are expecting. And then the harsh reality is some of these dogs, we take them out for a huge hike. We come home and they're like, now what? Because they still need to do something with their brain. They're still ready to go and think. So that can be exhausting for the average pet parent, and rightly so. You know, I'm not trying to shame anybody, but it can just be a lot just keeping up with them. I guarantee most of them have more energy than the person that they're living with.
Yeah, I think people really do not realize how much get up and go that a lot of herding dogs have, you
Yeah.
know. And when I used to take clients, I used to be like, okay, so they can literally run around following a quad for 8 hours. So you're at work for 8 hours. So, you know, just to try and get a little bit of, because I think people start to get into that, like, they're doing it to spite me, or they're, you know, they're
Yes.
behaving like this. It's some sort of a reaction to the human. It's like, no, you're just not meeting their needs, you know?
Yeah.
Um, so to go back to a little bit to what Zazie was saying, I thought it was interesting in the book how you touched on sort of this like two-part issue. One where people are ignoring real problems, things that we as dog professionals would say we need to get in there, we need to deal with this, and just saying, oh, they're quirks of this breed. And then on the other hand, they're sort of pathologizing what we would consider to be breed normal behaviors, you know, things that we don't need to get in there and fix. So where are these lines for you, and how do you help your clients sort of see the difference?
Yeah, well, it's tough because that exercise and enrichment piece, when we have people who are struggling to keep up, often what happens is it's sort of the narrative flips over into this dog is too much. He's a problem. I can't do it. It's too much. So it's normal for the dog, and there's really no problem with the dog. It's just that it becomes problematic for us. So we start to make it into an issue. Um, and then we also see dogs. So these dogs, you know, I don't mean to pick on border collies because we see this a lot with German shepherds and cattle dogs as well. But border collies, when we talk about compulsive disorders, they can be the poster child for a lot of things, and they can be these classic light and shadow chasers where it looks like, you know, we call it light and shadow chasing, and sometimes light is the trigger, but often it just looks like they're chasing lights and shadows. There's actually nothing there, or it looks like they're chasing insects, but there isn't, you know. So your client might say, oh, well, he's chasing bugs, but you know, the bugs aren't there. Well, so then we start to like raise red flags. But what happens with a lot of those dogs is that unless it's problematic for the guardian, we think it's sometimes funny. So a lot of compulsive disorders become sort of like entertaining to us. Um, or, and this happens with professionals and guardians, it gets labeled as normal because we think about them as herding breeds. We think about them as herding. And so we see them as just like, oh, they're just herding. That's what they do. They just kind of chase this stuff around. But it's not typical, and it isn't funny. And usually there is there's some problems there that come along with it. So for me, I think where it flips from, because some compulsive dogs, they may not have quality of life issues. Some of them are, you know, they're doing it very mildly and it might be okay to leave. Some of them are struggling. And so for me, where it flips is how the owner is coping, because some of these owners are barely holding it together. Like they are just doing everything in their day to try and like manage this dog, and it comes at a cost, but also quality of life for the dog. So some of these dogs are deeply struggling. Some of them will forego like food, water, play, sleep, being social, to perform the behavior. And some of them are even aggressive towards people and other dogs if they're interrupted. It's not okay. So if as soon as I think that there's something more at play like that, that is not my lane. I'm there to support as we're trying to help it moving forward, because there's going to be a lot of work that goes into that. But that's where we desperately need to have a vet or a vet behaviorist involved to make that diagnosis, because it's not something that I can make. And B, to make sure that there's not anything underlying. So a lot of those dogs will also have, there's a genetic component to it, but a lot of those dogs will also have pain or some other stressor as an underlying factor. So for me, it's like, you know, where like how bad is it here? Some of these dogs are actually doing moderately okay, but it's because every second of the day, I'm working on a case right now where if the guardian does one more second, I of work with that dog, I don't know how they would even cope. I mean, we're talking like literally 24 hours a day, 7 days a week that they're trying to manage this behavior. And so that's also something that we have to be very aware of as we move into these cases too. And like, it's often the red flag. Sometimes they're doing everything for the dog and the dog is kind of okay, but the guardian isn't. And if the guardian stops for 5 minutes, it's a house of cards, right? It's all going to come crashing down.
It
I
reminds
lost
me a
track
bit
of
of
your
what,
question, but
well, it just when you were talking, it reminded me a bit of we had a veterinarian do a webinar for the Academy recently, and I think it was Emma Milne. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was about sort of problem breeds, and especially like brachycephalic or other,
yeah.
extreme breeding. But it reminded me of something she said, which was along the lines of, we should get out of the habit of saying it's okay, he's okay for his breed, or it's okay, for the breed. And we need to be saying, is that okay for a dog? Because these, a lot of the dogs she was talking about can't even sleep without their mouth being propped up on a toy or something, so these dogs are struggling. But hearing that, it's like, we can't say, is this okay for, this is fine for a border collie because they do this light chasing thing. We need to say, is this okay for a dog? Would we accept this in other dogs? And I think that popped up into my mind of saying, it's true, we have to get out of that habit.
Well, and it's unfortunate too. It's one of those things where I just, my heart breaks every time I'm sort of involved in one of these cases. I've seen breeders who are breeding dogs who are performing these behaviors, and they're saying it's not compulsive, it's just normal. And then when it trickles down into the puppies, some of those puppies are going to be fine. Some of those puppies are probably going to do it to a level that doesn't cause any quality of life issues, and some of those puppies, it's going to be really, really bad for them. But it's even just misunderstood on every level, including who's making this. Like, we have to make sure we're not purposefully breeding dogs who are doing these things. It's not okay. It's unethical. And if we're saying like, well, it's fine, it's normal, it is whatever, I think we're producing dogs who are going to have poor quality of life.
Yeah.
And it's a very sad situation.
So on the other hand, what kind of fun conversations do you have with people when their dogs are doing things that are normal, but the people are worried that they're a pathology, sort of the other side of that coin? And this is something we would consider a normal herding breed thing.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough because we live in a society of life hacks. We see this all over the place. And what I think, and again, like I get it. What a lot of people are looking for is the hack. How do we not exercise the dog and still end up with a calm, end result? And sometimes it's about, with a lot of work with clients, it's about, I understand, like I understand, I live it and I know. But we've got to, like, what if this is normal, and what if we have to make sure that their needs are met? So that's my the first thing that I want to make sure of is because some dogs, they won't settle because they have other issues, right? Some dogs, they do absolutely have something that is causing a problem and why they can't settle and calm down. But for the vast majority of these dogs, I think right now there's this trend to try and like create calm. So it's like, don't do anything that might excite them. Don't do anything that might build a super athlete. Don't run them, don't exercise, don't play fetch, don't do this, don't do that. Because then what we might get is a dog who just understands they're supposed to be calm for the day. um, I come at it from the other direction. So I always want to make sure that all of their needs are met. That can be like a lot of exercise. I mean, my dogs probably get a couple of hours of exercise a day. We're out playing fetch. Griffin's herding. We're out walking. We're doing a lot of, I take them to different areas. We go into the woods. We go into the water. We go to the pond. We're doing all different things. And then I'm making sure that they're enriched as well, that they have time with me, right? I want to make sure that these dogs, they're very, like especially border collies and these dogs that are bred to like hang off our every word. They need time with us. They need engagement. I think like as one of the, top thing, they need to be with you. And so we have to meet all of their needs. And if we meet all of their needs, the vast majority of them do what mine are doing right now, which they're sound asleep under my desk right now. And I guarantee my dogs would not be doing that if I didn't do these things with them. So I get it with clients. I totally understand. Like I hear where they're coming from. But what if this is just normal? And what if we just have to put in some, it can be outsourcing. If you don't have the time, maybe we get dog walkers or like a hiker or like whatever it might be, or lend your dog to your friends and family, whatever it is. We've got to make sure though that we're coming at it from, there's just no life hack here, unfortunately. We've got to come at it from, we owe it to them. Because we bred them to be this way. We owe it to them to take care of all of those needs first. And then, see what the end result is. And most of them are going to be calm as an end result.
And I like the way you said maybe lend them to someone else, because I think there are a lot of people who would love to have a dog, but they're not able to. So for them to have the chance to be like the dog's auntie or the dog's uncle and take them for fun outings and do fun activities and then give them back again, I think that can be really nice for some people. So it's not just good for you with the dog, it's good for your friend or family member who takes on that role too. But so you're talking about meeting needs, and exercise and enrichment are needs for all dogs, but are there any particular kinds of exercise and enrichment that you especially recommend for a herding breed?
Yeah, well, some sort of outlet into being able to do what they were bred to do. So the vast majority of these dogs are not going to ever work livestock. And I get that. And that's not realistic to suggest. Nor do I think that it would be the right thing for a lot of them and a lot of the guardians, but they need some outlet into that. So I love, like I teach, I call it dry herding or like urban herding, but it's taking traditional herding cues and putting it onto a toy instead of livestock. The border collies love it. That's what they're bred to do, is just like listen to our every word and follow what we're asking them to do and do it. And they're just naturally rewarded doing these things, but they love like chasing and biting, and like anything that would kind of resemble what it might be like for them to work on livestock. I am a strong, strong believer that we have to be able to provide them with some variation of that, to keep them happy. And honestly, it's also a fun and easy way for us as well to meet. I don't want to say kill two birds with one stone, because that's not a very animal friendly term, but I can take Griffin out and do dry herding with him, and I don't have to come in and like work on his brain, because he's tired from doing both just from that alone. It's another common thing that I see like professionals and owners do, where they see herding behaviors, and then they say, just, we have to stop. We have to make sure they don't let them practice it, because if they practice it, they're going to want more of it. So we squash it down, or we don't let them practice it. But guess what's under the surface? Like, you can't go in and pull that out of the dog. So all we're doing is stopping them from performing something that we've, again, made them into. We created this. And so I love, like, collie balls, flirt poles, jolly eggs, herding a frisbee or a ball or a soccer ball. It doesn't have to be fancy, doesn't have to be pretty, but giving them some sort of outlet into doing that. I think it's a non-negotiable with these dogs.
Yeah.
I just was reminded when you're talking about, when you said something in the book about how these dogs always want to be close to people, which isn't really that typical of sled dogs, which are my dogs. And you said something about, you'll never go to the bathroom alone again. And I was reminded of that because this morning, Yoan was in the bathroom, and we have a spaniel herding breed mix. And she was like whining at the door and scratching. And then Yoan said something like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I forgot that I'm never allowed to go to the bathroom by myself."
Yeah, and we see it with so many breeds, for sure. But again, I think it's like, they always want to know what you're doing, what you're up to. Again, it doesn't take much to motivate them into, like, I was sitting on the phone a couple of days ago, and I said, "Okay, thanks, bye-bye." And I, like, went to hang up the phone, and Griffin jumped up and ran to the door, because he must have at some point put two and two together that if I get off the phone, that might be a cue that I'm going to go and do something. He can tell based on what mug I pick up in the morning what we're going to be doing. So if I pick up my travel mug, he runs to the door, because he knows that means we're going somewhere. Like, they're very willing partners. And so, if you're going to the bathroom, what if you are going to the bathroom and then you're going to put on your rubber boots and we're going to go out? Like, maybe I want to watch and follow and see what that's all about. So again, that can be kind of annoying for some people. For me, I love it. And I always think if there's not a border collie in the bathroom with me, I'm questioning where he is and what he's doing. He's probably counter surfing.
Right. And so, I mean, I think there's just so much great stuff in your book. For people who own active breeds of all classes, I think. But I do sort of want to know, what do you think for people, especially who have those herding breed dogs, what's your sort of if they learn nothing else, moment in your book?
I don't, there's so much, but I think for me, it's just, I want people to understand them. That's all I want. I got another really lovely message on social media this morning from someone who read my book, and they wrote to me to just thank me that, like, for understanding their dog, that now they just see where their dog is coming from. I think we live with these dogs, and in many cases, we just have a miscommunication. We don't understand them. I have a lot of clients who, they got an Australian cattle dog, or we call them a blue heeler, and they didn't even realize that they were herding dogs. They didn't realize that they were bred to work cows. They didn't realize that they were bred to heel. So maybe they have problems with nipping in the home. And then they're like, "What do you mean they were bred to bite the heels?" And it's like right in the name. And so I think we often have a big disconnect where we just have a miscommunication with them. The problem is they can't change that for themselves. And sometimes I think if we can just understand where they're coming from, we may not even have to do any training or do anything. It's just sometimes changes how we move them through their captive world. And it can just give a little bit of empathy into, like, when they do stuff, it's not that they're being bad. It's not that they're being problematic always. It's just sometimes that's just who they are. And instead of going like, "I hate that about you," what if we say, like, "Ah, there it is. There's your ancestors coming out. There's that thing. Let's go outside and chase the flirt pole around for a bit." So just a simple understanding. I just want people to understand where their dog is coming from. For me, it was like sort of part love story and part user manual. Just like it's fall back in love with who they are, instead of getting them and then wanting to, like, take the herding dog out of the herder. Let's just fall back in love with who they are.
I
Yeah, I
love
love
that. Yeah, I love that. And I think
that.
there's so much to love about herding dogs as well. And I miss my herding dog Bodger, because he had a lot of these characteristics of a herding dog, but he was also very special and so clever and amazing. So yeah, I think there's definitely a lot to love. And thank you for coming and sharing so many useful tips and understanding of herding dogs with us. And we're going to move on to the book section. So I am very curious to know which book you have been reading.
Okay. Fun. I was mostly excited. I've been thinking about this for like, since you asked me to come on, I was like, what book will I pick? I have so many. um, but keeping in line with herding breed dogs, I picked Find Momo Everywhere. So I've actually been following, this is written by Andrew Knapp, and I was following Andrew for years on social media. And he like travels around with his dogs, and he had this border collie Momo. And unfortunately, Momo passed away a few years ago. And he was very gracious about sharing that story on social media. I think pet loss is something that we just don't talk about enough or understand as a society. And I've lost a lot of humans and my dog in the last year. And I've had a lot of opportunity to think about how we sort of expect people to move forward after the loss of a pet versus a human. And for me, losing my dog Zelda was probably well, definitely is the biggest loss that I've had to date. And so this is a kid's book. It's about the loss of Momo, and it's lovely. I bawled my eyes out when I read it. So, but I think it's good for kids, and I also think it's great for adults as well. So I wanted to just kind of shed some light. It's got the border collie, and obviously he kind of looks like a little bit like Griffin, which made me preemptively cry when I read it as well. But I just think we need to talk more about pet loss and pet loss grief. And so if you know someone that has even an adult, I think this is a great gift personally, and it's a great read. You will cry, so make sure you have some Kleenex.
That sounds like a great choice. Thank you for coming and telling us about it. And I think you're right. There is such a need for help with pet loss. So that sounds like a very useful resource as well. Kristi, what have you been reading?
I picked an audiobook that I'm listening to right now. It's called Delicious: The Evolution of Flavor and How It Made Us Human. So I'm not sure if you'll be able to see that. It's by two people, a couple, Rob Dunn and Monica Sanchez, and one of them is an ecologist, and I think that's Rob, and one of them is an anthropologist, which I find interesting because I'm also an anthropologist. So sort of, I saw it and I picked it out of the list of books. I was actually looking for a book on species at risk, because I recently started doing more work with species at risk in the Northwest Territories. But I saw this and I got it because I always have this thing where I adore, like I'm like so attracted to the smell and taste of smoked peppers. I love chipotle and I love smoked paprika. Like I could just bathe in it. Like I'm so into that combination. And whenever I'm like thinking about how much I love it, I'm like, why do I like this? Like, what in my evolutionary history is this like? Is it just like a fake trigger? Like it's something else that, or there's something about, like, I get smoke. Okay. Smoked food is preserved. I get why that would be selected in my ancestry, but why spice and why the two together? So when I saw this, I was like, oh, I wonder. And there is a whole section on spices and why we go out of our way as humans and some other animals too. They're talking about other animals who make these weird choices to things that seem behaviorally inept. You don't take something that has a lot of calories and fat and nutrients, and you instead go for something that has this particular flavor. And why do we do that? So it's like this interesting combination of like culture and evolution and ecology all in one. And so I'll let you know if I find out about the smoky spice.
I would love to know. I'm actually hungry now. Like that, whenever you were saying, I'm not like a big smoked paprika fan, but now I'm like maybe I am on some evolutionary level because I just got really hungry listening to you talk about it.
Yeah, yeah. It did make me hungry as I was listening to it too yesterday. So.
We'll have to do a survey, see if everyone who listens to this is hungry. So thank you. That sounds like a really interesting book. And mine is fiction. So I've been reading Really Good, actually, which is by Monica Heisey, and it's her first novel, and it's very funny. But it's about so the main character Maggie is going through a divorce. She's 29, so she thinks she's like the youngest divorcee in the world. She wasn't actually married for very long, and it's about the first year of her life from that. So it sounds depressing. She is obviously heartbroken. Bits of it are heartbreaking, but it's also very funny in the way in which it's written. And the person who wrote it, it turns out, I didn't realize till the end, but she wrote for Schitt's Creek, and she wrote for the Baroness von Sketch Show. So
Oh
I
my
think
God.
it gives you some idea of the sense of humor that you find in this book. And I couldn't put it down. It was really, really funny. And it goes through lots of different things. So the husband moves out with the cat, and then she can't really afford to keep living in the place, but she stays there as long as she can. Luckily, she has a good job. Her friends are absolutely lovely at the beginning, but you know, she's going through a lot, so she's quite hard to deal with herself. And then partway through, she starts dating, and there are lots of horror stories from that, which all her friends are horrified by. And so it's very entertaining about a very difficult situation. So despite the subject matter, it's really well done, really well written, and it does make you laugh, maybe a bit tearful at points as well, because you really feel for it. You can tell what she's going through. But it's a really good book. I enjoyed it, and that's her first novel, and I hope she'll write more because it's very good indeed.
So we've got my book will make you cry, your book will make us laugh, and Kristi's will make us hungry.
Yes.
Got all of the important
Everything is covered.
Everything covered.
Conditions.
And the power of words. And thinking of the power of words. So, Emily, you've been talking to us about herding breeds and your wonderful book, Urban Sheepdog, which I think anyone who wants to understand their herding dog better should take a look at this book, because it really will help you understand the breed and what you can do to help to give them a better life, and yourself a better life as well if you're struggling with them. So thank you. And Emily, as well as having written the book, you have an amazing podcast, and you have your website and social media. Where should people go if they want to learn more about you?
Well, the website it's sort of the one-stop shop. So www.wildatheartdogs.com. And then I'm most active on Instagram. I am on Facebook, but a lot of my content happens over on Instagram. And I talk about all of these things in, individual reels, and really try and shed light on what these dogs are like. So you can find me there at Wild at Heart Dogs. And yeah, the podcast, Zazie actually, and Kristi, you were both on the podcast. So there's season 2 will be coming soon, but the podcast is either on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or right off of the website as well. So
Perfect. Thank you.
thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for coming to chat with us. I will put links to all of those in the show notes, and it's been a real pleasure to chat with you. Thank you to everybody who's been listening or watching, and please subscribe to make sure that you never miss an episode in future, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks, Emily.